two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm delighted to be here today with Scott Endler. He's an activist who's very concerned about the future. And our topic of discussion is degrowth. And he will explain what it is. So, Scott, say a few words about your background and tell us about degrowth.
So I'm local to Cortland and have been studying for many years as I see some big challenges ahead. So I've committed myself to learn all I can about our opportunities and constraints going forward and to reach out as a citizen educator to steer the conversation toward better outcomes.
And what is degrowth? How does it bring us to better outcomes?
Well, degrowth is a newer concept for social design that some scholars are beginning to explore. And I have studied the relationship of energy and economy for 15 years in order to understand the why of things must get smaller. Um, but the what to do of degrowth is a newer concept that I'm currently based largely on a book by Jason Hickel, Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World. I highly recommend this to all your listeners. He spends the first half of the book telling us about a subject that will be quite familiar to many of your regular listeners, which is a history lesson of capitalism, in which he goes back to early slavery up through feudal serfdom and the enclosures that followed, enclosures of the commons, and then continuing on with what Francis Bacon and Descartes um, brought forward as a concept of human exceptionalism, where this kind of drives capitalism, where they're telling us that humans are apart from nature and nature is ours to consume as we please. Um, so we can extract anything we want from the earth, it's ours for the taking. So without the consideration for any other living things. And then he goes up through the Industrial Revolution and now with the fossil fuel boom in the age of profiteering corporations, and shows us why capitalism requires growth.
So the big problems seem to be capitalism and extractivism. Is that so?
Yes, that's true. And so before I get into degrowth, I'd like to talk briefly about growth and why it's a problem. We hear governments and economists constantly talk about growth every day in the news. They try for a minimum of 2 or 3% annually, and which leads to the concept of exponential growth, which most people don't really think about very often. But if something grows at 3% per year, it'll double every 25 years or so. So it'd be 4 times larger at the 50th year and 8 times larger than today in the year 2100. So we have to stop and think, is that possible? Is that something that we should really try for?
That's kind of shocking. Maybe
Yeah,
some more about that?
yeah, there's a big problem with that because energy and materials are highly correlated with increase in GDP, such that if GDP were to double in 25 years, we would essentially need twice as much energy and twice as much materials also.
So that's a lot.
It's already an immense burden we're seeing with global heating and the onset of the mass extinction of wild animals. Um, Humans and our livestock now outweigh wild land animals 50 to 1. 80% of our total primary energy still comes from fossil carbon, which will inevitably be leaving us by decision and depletion. And we reuse we use resources according to the easiest first. So all our ore grades are also becoming much poorer. So this brings me to an important question that I always like to ask. Is it possible to have infinite growth on a finite planet?
That's a tough question. Now, I thought we could put a lot of hope in getting energy from wind and the sun.
So this big blind spot that we have as a society is the scale of our energy use. I looked at the totals for 2023, and so these are going to be some nerdy numbers, but when I get to the end, you don't even have to know like the units, but we're just going to compare the number. So I looked at 2023. The global total primary energy consumption was 620 exajoules. You don't really have to know what that is, and that equals 17,222 terawatt hours of primary energy that year. So when you divide by the number of hours in a year, then you get at the average power, which we're averaging 19.65 terawatts continuously. And so this is an unfathomably immense number. Um, Even as solar and wind had a record year last year, they only averaged 0.45 terawatts. So you can see we're using 19.6 and solar and wind is at 0.45. We have a big blind spot as to the scale and to keep this giant economy surging forward forever. The current amount of solar and wind would have to scale up 20 times over to supply even the half of the energy that would still be needed if we could eliminate all the current thermal waste that's involved with our engines and our heating systems. Electric systems are much more efficient. And people like Jacobson at Stanford have done calculations to tell us, well, we don't need 19, we only need 9 terawatt continuous. So if we could do the $100 trillion perfect electrification of everything, we could, get it down to less than half of what we're doing now. But that would still be 20 times our current supply from wind and solar.
So you've been talking about 20 times the wind and solar to supply about half of what we need. So can't you just say we need 40 times as much wind and solar?
Well, we would if we still needed the 19 terawatts, like with our wasteful system that we have now. So, like car engines are only 20% efficient, and heat pumps can be 500% efficient versus, heating with fuel oil or and industrial processes can be much more efficient with electricity rather than, using these thermal sources. So that's where these studies have shown us that if we could electrify everything, that we could get by on a little less than half of what we're using now. But this is even still, seeing that we would have to scale up wind and solar 20 times from where we are after all we've done, just makes it easy for me to see that I think we're going to come up way short and things are going to have to get smaller. So, and then talking about this relationship between the energy and the growth-based economy could be an hour-long talk in itself, but just, wanted to give us something to think about as to why I think our economic activity will have to be smaller.
I think you said capitalism requires growth. And honestly, I'm reminded of a bit of a joke. It comes from the Woody Allen movie Annie Hall, where he says a shark has to keep moving or it dies. Our relationship has to keep moving or it dies, but our relationship isn't going anywhere. I'm afraid we have a dead shark on our hands. So, well, Woody Allen was breaking up with Annie Hall. It sounds like maybe we have to break up with capitalism.
Well, this is true. I believe so. Um, a lot of what the degrowth advocates, are telling us is very similar to what your listeners and democratic socialists have already been thinking about. Um, but this is a big challenge. Our current system is got a lot of momentum. It's hard to turn it around. There's a lot of commitment, already to this system that we have. So really, we need a whole new way. Um, and I feel that we should choose this by decision and rather than waiting for it to be forced on us by disaster. So, um, the degrowth experts, though, like in Jason Hickel's book, offer us several suggestions as to how we can do this by design rather than disaster. And a key concept is to scale down all the wasteful and destructive industries that we currently have. So imagine if we could finally wise up and quit wasting so much money on the military arms industry. And other things like modifying our diet. He tells us that agricultural land for beef production accounts for 60% of the land use, but beef only provides 2% of our global calories. We should reverse the enclosure, from the medieval commons that began around the 1500s and decommodify public goods and expand the commons once again to make public services universal. Services and goods such as healthcare, education, housing, food, transportation. There's plenty of wealth already in existence to fund this initial build out of these new systems. If we were to reduce the wealth inequality with the progressive income taxation that we already had in the 50s, inheritance taxes, wealth taxes, we need to claw back a lot of the inequity of the last, 500 years of colonialism and even, the 40 years of failed supply side tax cuts for the rich that we've had in this country. So we could eliminate excessive advertising that makes us long for things that we don't really need, and planned obsolescence. He gives an example in the book that I can't quote exactly, where this was talked about behind closed doors. They literally said, "Don't make your products so good; they last too long. Make them so they break on purpose, and then we can sell them again and again." So a lot of our modern devices are intentionally designed to wear out or break down in such a way that can't be repaired. We can shift from ownership to usership for things that we don't use every day. Like everybody doesn't necessarily need their own chainsaw, or home repair equipment. Things could be borrowed as we need them from libraries, including tools, sewing machines, for example. Um, we could think about car share, ride share, and better public transportation. Bicycles would help, and I'm a big proponent of electric bicycles. So, we need to escape the growth imperative, which
Well,
is
yeah, I just wanted to say interestingly, I relate to different ones of those things differently, and maybe other people will have other different reactions. Like I am
so. I was
a
just curious in saying that,
Yeah,
like, what items do you think that you would borrow that I
well,
haven't
I can
listed?
tell you. I can tell you what I do borrow, you might say.
Okay, you're
I'm
already doing it.
an enthusiastic member of CarShare, Ithaca CarShare. The idea that there is somebody more professional than I am taking care of a car is wonderful. And yes, I can just barely drive it. On the other hand, you mentioned sewing machines. Different sewing machines are so different. I cannot imagine. I mean, I have one of the quirkiest, oldest sewing machines around. Seriously, I took it to Sew Green. They said it couldn't be repaired anymore. With the help of a brilliant high school student and a an adventurous handy person, I got it working again. I know
Sure
how
you
to
did.
use it. but
Well,
it's
actually, I offer that example because I know for a fact right now my libraries that I go to around the Syracuse area both have maker spaces,
yeah,
and they do have sewing machines in there. There are probably 8 sewing machines in the Fayetteville library,
yeah.
among
Well,
other things. They have all kinds of woodworking tools. They actually have 3D printers and laser cutters and more high-tech things. So yeah.
I'd be afraid to try to use those things. But
But
then
car share is a great example because cars just sit around most of the time. So
and take up
and
good
we need to,
land
yeah,
that
and a
we
lot
could
of
use for
materials.
housing if we had fewer cars.
Yeah. 2,000 kgs for a car, they really take up a lot of materials. Just to give everybody an idea that, of things that we can do to reduce all our material consumption. The growth imperative has a foundation in capital. Capital seeks growth and it seeks extraction. It extracts materials and it extracts labor from the workers. Um, there's another aspect of our economy that is important to understand of why there's a growth imperative, and that is that most money is loaned into existence by banks, and but it's interest bearing debt. So as you pay that back, that new money is kind of annihilates itself, it cancels itself, but the interest is real, and it can only be paid back with growth. So debt bearing interest bearing debt is another big reason why we're kind of stuck with growth. So we're going to have to figure out a different way of being able to keep things functional, without growth. Um, One easy step that would help a lot is another group that I work with is Citizens Climate Lobby. And they have a proposal, which is for many years, they keep offering a bill with sponsors to get legislation passed, and it's called carbon tax and dividend. And so the way that works, so if you tax carbon, the price of everything goes up because everything you see around you, energy is not just like what we can turn a light on or off or turn our heat down. There's energy embodied in everything that you see around you. All the bricks in the schools and the hospitals and our roads, those are all require immense energy to build and maintain. And that money is embodied in there of the price of the carbon. So if you tax carbon, the price of everything goes up: food, gas, housing, building materials. So in order to make this progressive and not regressive, the concept is to provide a dividend back to every citizen. And this way, rich people that consume a lot and don't care and just keep consuming, they're going to pay a lot more. And the thrifty people and the poor people that don't consume as much, they actually come out ahead. So that's a great plan that I support. Um,
Okay,
so
yeah, I was going to say if a carbon tax makes everything more expensive, then people will hate it, but you're saying dividends to the people who
yes,
need them.
yep, it's a very important. And so, in order to actually get this passed, what they've decided to do is make the dividend equal to all citizens. So, all U.S. citizens, I guess children under age get half or something. But the idea is so the wealthy people that are in power go, oh, well, that's what do you call redistributing my wealth. You're redistributing my wealth, but you just tell them, no, look, you're getting the same amount. Everybody gets the same amount, so it's totally fair. So yeah, that's their plan. I fully support that. It surprises me that we can't get it done actually, um, because it is fair to everyone, and it would automatically create a market lever that would help us, reduce our consumption, and especially our carbon energy consumption. So So as we, kind of list all these different things and consumption of unnecessary things decrease, then worker benefits can actually be realized. So the work week can be shortened while maintaining full employment. So we're going to need less, work effort. And in order to maintain the full employment, you basically shorten the work week and shorten the work hours. And then if the workers are getting a fair share of the profits and the productivity that their labor creates, then they'll still make a living wage. And this also assumes that most of your basic needs are in the public commons. So, you have job guarantees can be established, and then create work for restoration and mitigation that we're going to need from the climate changing, and also to compensate people for their time in the caring activities, which are now generally low paid or unpaid, like the homemaking, child rearing, elder care. These are all very important and should be well paid.
Yeah, and it almost everything that you mention are the kinds of things that socialists, democratic socialists, are looking for anyway.
Yes, I agree. So I think that these concepts of degrowth should be, something that the democratic socialists would be able to embrace. Um, so I guess if we're getting down toward the closing, I'll just, end by talking about a few things that I always like to speak about when I get a chance, and that's to remind people that the future exists, which is something we may not think about. And if we do, it's on a shorter time scale, like next election, or maybe our child's graduation, which is still only like a 20-year time frame. But the Earth will be in the habitable zone of the sun for another 500 million years or more. So I think we should try for that. So it's good to at least try to think ahead, the 100-year or 200-year time frame, because what we do now is really going to have an important um, kind of shaping as to what can become of that. And I hope this steer, toward a whole new way of organizing society, where we can make decisions, via direct democracy, all the way from our local councils all the way to a global system. Really, a lot of these big challenges that we have are global now. We're a global civilization. So, really, we are going to need global governance to coordinate all of this. And, what can happen if one, region or country tries to do this on their own? You get outcompeted in the current market system that we have. And so, you come out on the low end of the stick, so to say. So, really we need to try for local to global democracy, where informed and empathetic majorities can override a selfish, short-sighted minority, to set levels of consumption no higher than can be regenerated, and waste no more that can be safely absorbed. And so this is a concept that a group founded by Johann Rockstrom has a concept of the planetary boundaries, and shows us that our sustainable future would require a much smaller throughput of human activity than we're accustomed to right now. So all this degrowth must also be implemented equitably at a global level, since we're all stuck here together on this one finite planet. Again, global governance and cooperation are going to be critical. If you try and do it yourself, then there's a race to the bottom, which we already see in different ways. So, such as tax shelters, where you have different countries that really have nothing to lose to say, hey, give me your income tax instead of them. I'll only charge you 4%. They want to charge you 15. So the corporation can go set up a little office somewhere um, in Ireland or Cayman Islands and say, okay, that's my base now. I'm not a U.S. corporation. I'm an Irish corporation, and they only have to pay 4%. So we really need to kind of cooperate on this whole thing so we don't have this race to the bottom. I would say that, Rockstrom and others are showing us that we're currently in overshoot. Due to all this acceleration that was enabled by, this non-repeatable stroboscopic pulse of energy that we got from fossil fuels. And it's just fueled our, massive extraction of all these, virgin high quality materials. And both of these will be leaving us soon by decision and inevitable depletion. So my hope is that we can pragmatically focus what we have left in a conscious and concerted effort to humanely coast back down to levels of consumption that can be sustained while keeping the social fabric intact. So an analogy that I like to think about is where the new airplane pilots are actually taught to consider this, like what happens if you're flying and your engines start running out of power? And they're taught not to panic, but to take what they have and set all the controls as best as they can to extend the glide, to look for a safer place to land.
Reminds me of in 2009 when a plane took off. I can't remember from which New York City airport. Birds flew into the motor and stopped the motors. And this really experienced pilot, nicknamed Sully, headed for the Hudson River, flew under the George Washington Bridge and landed in the water. There were some injuries, but nobody died. The rescue crews saved everybody. After that incident, I heard the commentary that, you know what, the pilot was a union pilot. The rescue crews were all union members. That meant that everybody was really experienced on their job and knew what they were doing. Thank
I love that
you.
story. Thanks for reminding me. That's a perfect example, and I will
Yeah.
use that again. Yeah, he set all his controls and picked a safer place to land.
Thank you, Scott Endler. Degrowth, why we need it, what it is, how we can land our world economy in a safer place. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.